Not really sure what I'm going to say about the election. You got to get it rolling somehow.
Okay.
And then I can.
Yeah. Well, I'll begin. I may go to Richard first and then to you.
Sure, yeah.
And that'll give you some background to play with.
We'll
and
see
the direction.
We'll see what Richard says. Okay. How about that? Right.
2 minutes.
2 minutes. Plenty of time.
Boy, this is really sort of flying by the seat of our pants here.
What did you think of the Sissy affair?
It was nice. Everybody was hard of hearing there.
Yeah, everybody's hard of hearing, so you spoke loud. And I know how to dominate those crowds because nobody's got a voice that carries.
No,
like
no,
that.
you carried it.
Yeah. We were in the garden room at the Lamar Towers.
Oh, Lord.
And Lamar Towers, corner of Westheimer and Buffalo Speedway.
It's a nice room with a nice view.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Sissy throws all of her parties there.
Okay.
And I just met the young men who came in late the last minute before I left.
Right. Mm-hmm.
But everybody else was there, and I was belle of the ball for a while, and then acquiesced and let somebody else be belle of the ball. Doug blended in very well with everything. He noted that one of the ladies there had voted for Trump. And
she said she was the independent. She said, I'm the independent one in this room.
Yeah.
That was okay.
Oh, yeah. A parish in Louisiana just stole her family estate.
And that's surprising?
Oh, no, not Louisiana. Nothing.
Hell, anything that ain't nailed down in the state of Louisiana is going to come up missing.
Yeah, the deal is they sold her, and she didn't find out about it for 5 years. And they went to pay taxes, and they said, these taxes had already been paid. Who paid them? Well, this friend of the sheriff.
Mm-hmm.
So you know where that's going.
Mm-hmm.
And so, but she managed to find a judge, a black judge in Louisiana that gave her land back. Now she's got a problem because during that process, they bulldozed the historic house that was on the land. And she lost that asset, even though she had a FEMA number and a contract bid to rebuild it. Well, hello, my name is Ray Hill. The name of the program is Public Affairs, Public Access. And we're the folks who bring you access to television all the time. And we're broadcasting from a state-of-the-art studio here at Houston Media Source. And once in a while, I come in here and host a program for you. And today's program, well, we got a broad range of subjects we're going to talk about. One of the subjects we're going to talk about is Houston and the United States just got through with an election with, for some people, like myself, we were surprised with the outcome. So what does that mean and where are we going from that? And what does that look like compared with previous elections? We always think that what's going on now was the only time any of this has ever happened. Big surprise. Well, that's kind of a construction that we don't have to live by. There's other construction. We've got a couple of guests in the studio. We've got Douglas Caddy, who's been on this show many times before. And Douglas Caddy is an attorney. He is also a political activist, and he's a great student of history. And he writes and talks about elements of American history that other people sometimes just don't even want to think about because it's a lot easier to think about it in context. And I've got another friend of mine in the studio tonight, Richard Nevills. And Richard Nevills is from Lufkin, Texas. Now, before you pass him off as some country bumpkin, don't do that. Richard's got a good education. He's got a good head on his shoulders. He looks at things a little differently than I might or than Doug might. So we've got a combination of three perspectives on the show. And I may just opt out and not have an opinion, but then, of course, I always reserve the right to have an opinion. But you may not hear it if I can get these two guys going, because the purpose of this is to, number one, inform you, and the other purpose is to entertain you. Public affairs, public access, Papa Show. My name is Ray Hill, and Richard, what did you think about the outcome of this election?
Well, first off, you not having an opinion is like meeting an honest politician. It's not going to happen. Well, first off, the fact that Donald Trump got elected scared the crap out of me. This guy has no idea what he's going to do from one moment to the next. Then I sat back and gave it a little thought and said, well, maybe this is exactly what we needed. True, he wouldn't know the truth if it crawled up and bit him on the backside. But he's going to keep standing up there, he's going to keep lying, and he's going to force the House and the Senate to reign control over him. And he's also going to try to run roughshod over people's rights, which are going to get them off their backsides. I mean, when we're dealing with elections where 10% of the population shows up to vote, or when you don't show up to vote, you get Donald Trumps. You get Donald Trumps who will do whatever, wherever, and think they have free reign.
Well, tell me, Richard, do you think that this is a construction? Do you think that he has created this image for his own purposes, or you think that we're getting an accurate view of who is there?
I don't think we're getting an accurate view of who or what is there. I think he plays to whatever audience is in front of him. Remember, he's been basically an entertainer since we first heard about him in the 80s. I mean, where he pulled the stunt of he was out selling apartments in the building he just bought, he was doing that in front of all the media cameras. He's played to the media to run all his hotels and to bring business into his hotels. Donald Trump is nothing but an advertising campaign. I don't think now or ever will we ever see the true Donald Trump. He goes to the Rust Belt and he tells them, I'm going to save your jobs. I'm going to bring all the manufacturing back. When there's not, even if he wanted to, he couldn't do that because technology has eaten half those jobs. So if he can bring some of them back to the Rust Belt, hey, good for him. But for him to do that, something's going to have to be in it for him. He's not going to do it. He's not going to do it just for altruistic reasons, as people seem to think that that's all he's going to do it for.
Doug, Richard brings up the question of politics as entertainment. Isn't that, wait a minute, didn't we think about that when Ronald Reagan was running for the president?
We did, but some elections are different from others. Now, I'm thinking about the first time I became familiar with the presidential election. I was born in 1938. This was the election of 1952, when Eisenhower was running against Taft for the Republican nomination. And my family lived here in Houston at that time. And I remember how the turnout for the Republicans was phenomenal. Eisenhower excited people. There was a tremendous turnout, and Eisenhower got the nomination for the Republican nomination for president. Taft did not. And I look at that as that was a civilized election in those days. And I'm looking at right now, and what I'm seeing right now is that we've had an election, but the tens of millions of people are not accepting the outcome of it. There's great unrest out there. People are very upset, and it's not going to go away. It's not going to go away. I know the Trump people want it to go away, but it's not going to go away because, let's face it, Hillary Clinton got 2.8 million more votes in popular votes than Trump did. And so there's a feeling that this is not really a legitimate election. So what I think, in contrast to 1952, which was a very civilized and all-American election, you might say, we have the potential here for great civil unrest for the next 4 years.
Well, you know, civil unrest is something, this is my business. You know, I do marches on Washington and parades and festivals, and I mean, that's the business I'm in.
You're a disciple of Saul Alinsky.
Well, I'm a Saul Alinskian, and we were discussing that on the way over here, that not all Saul Alinskians are true fine Saul Alinskians, and I may be a little different. But do you have any idea how complacent people become? You know, let's take the GLBT community. Of course, that's just because I'm a member of the GLBT community. We've got all these gains we made under Obama. I mean, trans persons can pee where they want to and where they think they feel comfortable. I mean, a guy with a dress on can go into a ladies' room and close the door and squat and pee just like anybody else. Gay people can get married. Do you know how quickly people think that just because they can do that now, they've always been able to do that? They have a very short memory of what it took to get there. Well, what it takes to get there is on the streets. Activism creates that opportunity to happen. But
And that's true of the civil rights movement too, right?
sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, once you've got it, once you've got equal rights, the right to vote and all of that, you think you've always had those things. Mm-hmm. Except that's not the right perception. You haven't always had those things. And somebody sacrificed and was put at risk, and people went to jail, and some people even died behind that stuff. So the idea that there's going to be civil unrest means that we're going to have to change the character of the way people think about the gains we made and how permanent they think they are. Now, you've got obvious changes are coming in the Supreme Court. Well, not really. I don't think that even Donald Trump can find some more conservative person than Scalia to put on the Supreme Court. But I'd like to point out that Hill versus Houston, which is a pretty progressive freedom of speech case, got Scalia's vote.
Along with
Along with 7 others. Right. So it was 8-1. It is easier to deny somebody their rights and equality than it is to take it away from them after they get it. There's a certain amount of conservatism of the court that says once the court has agreed on an issue, now 5-4 is pretty iffy, but you got 6-3, that's kind of an enduring rule. And so the rollback on that is not going to come as fast as like Ted Cruz wants it to come, because he's out there passing a federal bathroom law that would require people to show their birth certificates every time they wanted to go into a public restroom to make sure they were going in the right one. Now, logistically, Richard's enjoying this. Richard, do you mind carrying your birth certificate to go to the boys' room?
I'm still trying to figure out why anybody is still taking Ted Cruz seriously. Even his own party basically has thrown him to the curb. I mean, let's face it, he's a senator from this part of Texas.
Well, all of Texas.
But Ted Cruz is kind of like the car wreck on side of the freeway. You're going to slow down and watch what he says and watch what he does just because you're curious about what's going to happen next. But nobody's actually going to take him seriously. I mean, you remember when the government shut down a year and a half ago or whatever. Oh, I didn't do this. Then they play the news thing right beside it where he's saying it. Then he's saying, I didn't do this. They're playing right beside it where he did do it. Is there anybody actually taking this guy seriously at all? I mean, sooner or later, Donald Trump should take a lesson from what happened to Ted Cruz, because it's going to happen to him, and it's slowly starting now. The news media has begun to question everything he says because, like I said, he wouldn't know the truth if it crawled up and bit him on the backside.
Well, one thing we got to think about is and I put this on Facebook about a month ago, is whether Trump is in the early stage of dementia, whether he's in the first stage of Alzheimer. And then I understand today on one of the television programs, this was brought up as a legitimate subject. And when you listen to him, you know, he forgets what he says. And when questioned about it, he cannot remember what he said. And
Well,
so,
it came up today. It came up in the context of his saying that the attack in Germany, the big truck attack in Germany, was an attack on Christianity. And then whenever he was asked about that, he put that out in a printed release. And then when he was asked about it, he said it was an attack on humanity, and he wouldn't go back to the Christianity language. But he stuck with the humanity language.
Again, he's just selling to who's ever in front of him. I mean, you don't sell to Brookshire Brothers the same way you would sell to Kroger's. You're dealing with different people. Trump is selling whatever he's saying to whoever's in front of him.
Isn't his career as a salesman? I mean, that's what he does.
That's who he is. I mean, that's like asking a leopard to change his spots. You can't expect Trump to stop selling all of a sudden because he got president-elect. I mean, were you expecting to see some kind of massive personality shift in him? Of course not.
Well,
He is going to sell to whatever audience is in front of him. Truth is immaterial to closing the deal.
well, one of the great political closers of all time was Lyndon Johnson.
Well, you would know him a little better than I would.
I love Lyndon Johnson. Actually, I voted for him. He was Texan. He was some of his positions. I mean, his positions were off enough for me to go to Washington and march down the street and demonstrate against war. I did that. But while I was in town, Lady Bird invited me to the White House for coffee because we were Texas political friends. And so just because we were out there chanting, hey, hey, LBJ, how many kids you killed today, that doesn't mean that Lady Bird and Linda Baines and I can't sit down and have a cup of coffee in the White House. Was honored to get the invitation and had a suit. I was usually wearing my hippie clothes, but I had a suit to wear.
well, there's another side to Lyndon Johnson too, and I thought I might bring it up right here, because in 1982 I started working with the Moody Foundation out of Galveston, Texas. And in 1983, Billy Saul Estes, who was Lyndon Johnson's silent business partner, contacted him from prison. Billy Saul was in prison, and said that this was 1983 that he did this. Lyndon Johnson died in 1973. And he said he wanted to tell his story of his life and what he and Lyndon Johnson had done. And so one of the trustees of the Moody Foundation, Sherman Moody, sent me up to the federal prison in Midland, Texas, and I met with Billy Saul, and I said the best way to do this is to write a book. He said, I'll think about it. And he got out of prison 6 months later. Meantime, he gave the idea to his daughter, Pam, and she wrote a book, which was actually almost a bestseller, but it was only about what happened to the family when he was in prison on 2 different occasions. He was a notorious...
But he was an ally with Lyndon Johnson.
Lyndon Johnson?
Yeah, they were allied together.
Right. And so when he got out of prison, he contacted Sherman Moody, the trustee of the Moody Foundation, and said, I'd like to go forward and tell my story. And I went up to Abilene, Texas, which is where he was living, and I met with him. And he said, yes, and I said, well, the Moody Foundation will give you a grant. He requested a grant. We'll give you a grant, but it has to go through a tax-exempt organization. And he said, well, we can go right now to the Abilene Christian University, which we did. We met with the president, and Abilene, and the way it was structured with the Abilene Christian University, we get a $500,000 grant. $400,000 would be for its purposes as it saw fit on its campus and so forth, and $100,000 would go for the writing of the book.
Money laundering is expensive in West Texas.
And so the next step, Billy Saul said, well, I have to get immunity for what I'm going to tell, and so he asked me to go to Washington, D.C. and get immunity on his behalf. And I had a friend who was Edward Miller, who was a former assistant director of the FBI, and he knew the head of the criminal division, assistant attorney general for the criminal division, Stephen Trott, in the Justice Department. So we met with him, and he said, well, we did a letter of proffer from Billy Saul as to what he'll tell. I got that letter of proffer in which Billy Saul said, enumerated there were a number of murders that had been committed, and there was a lot of financial skullduggery and so forth. He was willing to talk about this, and so it was set up where the FBI would go back into the files and see if there was anything to substantiate what Billy Saul said in his letter of proffer that I wrote on his behalf, and they found there was. Okay. And I might just mention that there were actually about 9 murders that Billy Saul enumerated, and I might just at this point go back over 3 of them. The first one, which he says it was all decided upon by a cabal, he said, of Lyndon Johnson, Cliff Carter, his assistant, Billy Saul Estes, and Mac Wallace. Mac Wallace was a stone killer that he alleged. Now this is not my opinion. I'm repeating what Billy Saul said. We have to factor that in. Billy Saul was a convicted felon. He was a notorious swindler, but you know he had a story to tell. There's no doubt about it. And so he said that John Kinzer came from Washington, came to Texas, to Austin, and he killed a man named John Kinzer. John Kinzer.
Wait a minute, you just said John Kinzer came and killed John Kinzer.
Did I say that? Okay.
Let's tidy that up.
Sorry about that. No, Mac Wallace came from Washington, D.C. to kill John Kinzer because John Kinzer, in effect, had a close personal relationship with Lyndon Johnson's daughter, Lyndon Johnson's sister, Josepha. And Josepha had told him too many things that she should not have told him about LBJ. And so he had to be eliminated. He was caught by escaping from the city at that time. He stood trial, was convicted for murder of forethought, homicide, but given a suspended sentence and walked out of the court.
Out of Travis County.
Out of Travis County, okay. And so the second murder was Henry Marshall, who was a U.S. Department of Agriculture employee here in Texas, who put together, he figured out the scheme that Billy Saul Estes had on his...
the grain elevator thing.
And so forth. And they tried to lure him to Washington. They give him a good job, buy him off by giving him a good job, and he said no. And so he was killed in 1961. That was 10 years later from John Kinzer. He was killed in 1961. And as a result of that, in 1984, which is right after, a year after Billy Saul got out of prison, after I was working with him, he went before the grand jury in Robertson County, which is where Henry Marshall had been killed, and presented evidence, and the grand jury changed the ruling of Henry Marshall's death from suicide, which was what it was originally because it had been rigged that way, to homicide, death, unnatural death. And so he did change, he did in his efforts change one
the classification of the death.
Right.
Now, did any criminal trials come out of that?
No, because so much time had passed, okay? We're talking about 1984, which is when he gave the testimony, and Henry Marshall was killed in 1961.
Okay.
And meanwhile, Mac Wallace, who he alleged was the killer of Henry Marshall, had died in an automobile accident, which is a lot of questions about that too. The third thing is that the third murder, or death, I'll say, was the death of Josepha, which was LBJ's sister. Now, as part of Billy Saul telling his story, I arranged for Lucy Ann Goldberg to come down. She's a literary agent, very famous. She was involved in the Clinton scandals, you know, and bringing, and led to the impeachment of Clinton, censure. And she came down to Abilene and met with Billy Saul, and they were talking about Josepha's death. And Billy Saul, this is what he said. These are his words: that a piece of cake on Christmas Day, a poisoned piece of Christmas cake on Christmas Day was given to Josepha, and she died the next day. She died that night and was buried the next day. And actually, I have the death certificate, which shows that.
There it is it's on the screen.
On the screen, which shows that she died on December 26th, the next day after eating the cake, and was buried that day in the Johnson Cemetery. the next day in Johnson Cemetery.
27th.
And so
What is the cause of death?
the cause of death was cerebral hemorrhage. That's what the coroner wrote.
Yeah.
But that's not what Billy Saul said, okay? And so he once again...
Well, you don't have time for an autopsy in 24 hours.
No, they wanted the body in the ground right away.
Yeah.
They wanted the body in the ground right away, you know. And so I'm just bringing this up as how, now what was the end result of all this? The end result was that Billy Saul backed out of telling his story because the Abilene Christian University, because of the publicity surrounding his testimony in Robertson County about all these murders and so forth, they said it was just too hot an issue for them to get involved in. So there was no means at that time for the Moody Foundation to give a grant to any organization. At that point, Billy Saul withdrew. The FBI agents came down to interview him in Abilene, but he withdrew at that time. And that was the end of the story, though he does talk about in his autobiography. About 7 years ago, he wrote his autobiography was published, and he does talk about this in a limited way. And so I'm just saying...
Well, let me talk to the audience here for a while. Now, there's a whole bunch of stuff on the table here. I mean, we got Richard's analysis, which is creative and well put about Ted Cruz, and I'm sure there's some Ted Cruz supporters out there that would like to defend Ted against Richard's assault, and there are some people with long, warm memories about Lyndon Johnson. Maybe even some folks out there that knew Billy Saul. I've always admired Billy Saul because he's one of the best con men of my era, and he just got away with it and got away with it and got away with it. And finally, somebody from the Department of Agriculture said, I'm going to give you the money for this grain elevator, but do you realize how consistent you are building grain elevators? This looks exactly like the grain elevator I already gave you assistance for. And that's how he got busted. And so all of this is on the table. You can call in. The telephone number is at the bottom of your screen. It's 713-807-1794. If you want to join the conversation, you can join. You can't change the conversation. We're going to keep on talking about what we're talking about, but you're welcome to give part of it if you want to call in. Well, Doug, you've raised some interesting, is there ever a straight-up change of power without smoke in the back room?
Well, that's a good question. We don't know. We don't know.
We haven't found an example yet.
Right. But in terms of the Billy Saul case, I just want to mention 3 books here for the audience. This one is by Ronnie Duggar, who's a very famous...
Oh, yeah, Ronnie Duggar is a muckraker of first order in Texas.
In Texas.
Yeah, he was a Texas Observer. Now he's Texas Monthly. He's out there.
And this is his book, The Politician, which is about Lyndon Johnson. This is a book very critical of Lyndon Johnson by Phil Nelson, and it's a critical biography of Lyndon Johnson. And the book that just came out a few months ago is Faustian Bargains, Lyndon Johnson and Mac Wallace.
Okay. So Mac Wallace gets into the books.
Get in the books.
About Lyndon Johnson.
About Lyndon Johnson.
Now, don't stack those books up. Spread them out so that you don't build a wall behind. We'll get into building walls later in the show.
There's one other aspect I want to mention here because it sort of leads into what Mr. Trump is going to decide on the Supreme Court. Now, Billy Saul, and these are his words, he said he gave a $500,000 bribe to a U.S. Supreme Court justice. He said that, okay? And that was Justice Tom Clark. And it sounds unbelievable that...
Wait a minute, Tom Clark was not on the Supreme Court.
Yes.
He was Chief Justice of the Fifth Circuit.
No, Tom Clark was on the U.S. Supreme Court. Okay. On the U.S. Supreme Court. And
before my time.
Yeah, okay. And he came out of Dallas. He was a Texas boy. He was a part of the Lyndon Johnson Texas boy mafia, you might say. And so what do we have here? Billy Saul was convicted at 2 different federal trials. He was also convicted at a state trial. And he appealed his case to the U.S. Supreme Court. And the U.S. Supreme Court reversed his conviction for his state case.
In a state case.
And who wrote the Supreme Court decision?
Tom Clark.
Justice Tom Clark. And who was Lyndon Johnson's attorney? John Cofer. Now, John Cofer represented John Kinzer, that fellow who killed.
Now, this is a regular cabal.
And he was one of the two lawyers who was involved in Lyndon Johnson being elected to the Senate in 1948. Abe Fortas and John Cofer were the two attorneys down in Alice, Texas, that stuffed that ballot. So they didn't stuff the ballot, but they handled the legal ramifications. And all the cases that
Coke Stevens got short end of that.
He did, Coke Stevens. and all the cases that Billy Saul had in court, John Cofer represented him. And so John Cofer represented him before the U.S. Supreme Court. And so John Cofer has a real story to tell. Of course, he's passed on too. But this is how the system worked in those days. I'm just saying that Lyndon Johnson did become president. There's different ways of becoming president. He right at the inauguration, he rode in a car with a limousine with Clare Boothe Luce, and he said to Clare Boothe Luce, he said, you know, there is a precedent for a vice president becoming president, and that's why I decided to accept the offer of serving on the ticket with John Kennedy. He said, there's that possibility of my becoming president, and sure enough, it happened.
Clare Boothe Luce. The other character that wrote books about Lyndon Johnson was Katharine Graham in her biography. And Katharine Graham says in pertinent part, and I would suggest you read the whole biography, it's worth reading. She was out at the ranch, and they were having barbecue for supper. And Katharine and Lyndon were out in Lyndon's Jeep, which was a Lincoln Continental. That's what he jeeped on the ranch. And she said, well, I understand we're having barbecue for supper. And he said, well, I can't be there. Lady Bird's got me booked up to go to this place and say this thing, and I got to go, and I won't be there, but I'm sure the barbecue's good. A guy's been barbecuing for me for 30 years, and he never messes up. It's open pit barbecue, got the pig on spit. It's great stuff. You'll enjoy it. And he said, but Lady Bird runs my life, and I just hate that. And Katharine Graham says, she said, Lyndon Johnson, if it weren't for Lady Bird Johnson, nobody would recognize your name. That's not a bad line for a great publisher's biography.
Right.
Richard, what do you think about all this madness? Now, you've heard about people that you'd never heard of before. All these people are way before your time.
This is true. I wasn't born until 67. Not trying to make you feel old, Doug. Right.
You don't have to make us feel old. We already did that.
But we see the same thing today that they saw then. It just wasn't getting as widely reported. You could control the media when there's less of it.
Well, you said something earlier. You said that Trump is so far out that it'll bring people to their feet and they'll start marching and resisting that. If
well, I
Hillary...
didn't necessarily say they'd start marching, but at least they'll start paying a closer attention and maybe show up at the ballot box, show up at their local elections, actually going to find out what people are saying, because they will figure out that if they don't, they get Donald Trump. And while most of the things he is going after so far do not directly affect me, they directly affect people I care about and some of my friends, which in my world is even worse than coming after me.
Well, under the circumstances, nobody's talking about the fact that if Hillary Clinton had been elected president and not Donald Trump, I would find occasion to go out to the streets and talk to people and organize marches and complaints about policies that I disagree with that Hillary Clinton has on the agenda. If Bernie Sanders, let's go way out, if Bernie Sanders had somehow pulled off a miracle and come in from outside of the Democratic Party and pulled the wool all of those people's eyes and got enough vote to get the Democratic nomination, and he had won, I'd be out in the streets because the sucker couldn't accomplish anything if he had the office. So I'll be out there demonstrating that he ain't doing anything and things are not getting any better under his administration because he got them all so cut up. I went to Bernie Sanders' office one time to lobby against private prisons. And you know what they told me? Well, we don't have the votes in Congress to do that, but when the revolution comes, I got to wait on a revolution?
My
See
thing
some
is,
prison criminal justice reform? Give me a break.
I think we'd have been worse off if Hillary Clinton would have gotten elected.
Well, it may have been.
She's going to steal every bit as much as Trump and her party is. She's just going to be better at it, and she's not going to attack some people's rights the way he is. And she's quieter, she's smoother. Trump's going to tell you he's going to steal your wallet and then do it. She's not going to tell you she's going to steal your wallet. She's going to ask about your mama while she's taking your wallet out of your pants.
How's your mama's health, by the way?
Well, what bothers me about Trump are the people that he's putting in his cabinet that he's nominating, and these are not very sterling characters. I mean, the FBI. Don't forget, in order to be get those appointments and get the Senate to confirm them, you've got to have a thorough FBI investigation, and a lot of these nominees that he's putting forward have lots of things they have to worry about.
Well, he can fix that real easy, Doug.
Are we going to air that in public? Will the Senate actually bring up those hidden, secret issues?
I expect the Democrats to do that on the confirmation process.
Well,
Absolutely.
actually, Trump can fix it before they even do it.
Oh.
I pardon every one of you for anything you've done in the past. Gone.
That was
Problem solved.
Gingrich told us that before. Doesn't mean that it can't be brought up in their confirmation process. Just
Well,
because
if-
you got a pardon doesn't mean that they can't talk about it.
Yeah.
And remember, everything is in the political view.
Well, see, one thing that's good because these folks still got to get elected in 2 years. And that's what's going to control Trump. I mean, he can go out there, he can do what he wants, but then he's got, as the purview of the Constitution, the president's purview was foreign policy. The House is the budget and creating the laws and things like this. And these people have to come back to their community and explain why they allowed him to do something. That's what's going to control Trump, because they're not going to let him do quite as much as he'd like to do. I mean, you hear them say, oh, we're going to kill Obamacare. Then you come back to the House. Yeah, we are. It might take us a decade, but we're going to get there. You bet. Well, wait a minute. Last time I checked, you couldn't be president but 8 years. So they can kill it at 2 years after he's gone if he's lucky enough to get elected a second time. So...
Well, that's what we're faced with, really, is whether the Tea Party hardcore Republicans are going to go along with what you're just saying, or whether they're going to demand that these things that they want be enacted. Repeal Obamacare, repeal all the social programs, cut back on Social Security, privatize Social Security, food stamps, cut way back on food stamps, Section 8 housing, any kind of social program whatsoever.
Well, see, the problem is he can say he wants to do that. They can say they want to do that.
Yeah.
But then they have to go back and get elected again in 2 years.
Well, another problem we face is the way the system is gerrymandered their districts. A great many of them never have to worry about being opposed. They're gerrymandered where they only have Republican voters.
Well, wait a minute.
That would depend on how far he tries to go after these other people. I mean, so the reason the Tea Party has been so successful is nobody else shows up. Let's see about getting some other folks to show up.
And you
It's
get
like
folks angry
I
enough?
watch the
people are
thing.
motivated by anger?
The NRA has gone crazy. They can do anything they want. But really, there's what, 2 million people belong to the NRA? Get 3 million people that think differently, have them join the NRA, problem just went away. So you've got 10% of the Tea Party people out beating their chest, saying this, and they're the ones get elected. Let 15%, a different 15% show up. They're gone. Whatever they say, it's irrelevant.
Well, the gerrymander.
And so it's going to be how many people, other than the ones that have been showing up, that have a problem with what's been going on, will depend on if the Tea Party has any ground whatsoever. And having been to the National Tea Party headquarters, which is in Branson, Missouri, I mean, if you've got to put a headquarters someplace, that's the place to go. It is.
Yeah,
they got great shows.
The shows go bankrupt
buffets.
about every 6 months. And Nita Bryan used to have a show up there. She bankrupted twice. But the gerrymandered issue that you brought up is an interesting issue, because who does the gerrymandering? State legislatures do all this gerrymandering. And so the districts are drawn with, they say, well, we don't draw them with a racial bias, we draw them with a political bias. And so far, the courts have not bothered with that. They've let them, if you're drawing it separate, give Republicans more power than Democrats, that's copacetic. If you're drawing it to give white people more power than black people, that's not copacetic. That's the civil rights laws. They used to have preemptive civil rights law enforcement. That's all gone. You've got to, after the fact, analyze it, and there are a couple of states in suspension right now, including several districts in Texas are in suspension right now before the courts. And up comes 2000 and 2020. And in 2020, we do another census, and it's time to draw all the lines. Now, the question is, who is going to draw those lines? With the current construction of state legislatures, same people are going to draw the lines then that have drawn them the last time. And that's been true ever since Tom DeLay got caught coming up with out of sequence a redistricting of everything in Texas to the Republicans' advantage. And people say, well, he won the appeal to the case. No, his case is still out there pending somewhere on further appeals on different details. But if the DeGuerins lose Tom's case, I will train him to do his prison time.
There are two.
Hey, Tom. Looking forward to our class.
Hey, he was a good dancer. Stop picking on Tom.
Okay.
There are two major threats to the way our government operates. Okay, well, there are many threats, but let's single out two. One is gerrymandering, and the other one is electoral college. I mean, the electoral college is an outmoded institution, and it showed in this election that the loser is the winner. And so I think we've got to address both issues. Somehow they've got to be addressed if we're going to have.
Well, you're talking about constitutional amendment as far as the electoral college is concerned. That's a pretty uphill process, and it takes 3/4 of the House and 3/4 of the Senate. Mm-hmm. President's got to be in there somewhere, and then the states. 2/3 of the states have got to ratify it. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And that's a pretty steep incline.
It is. But it's something we've got to tackle one way or another.
Gerrymandering, on the other hand, is a policy issue.
Well, it really is a court issue. I mean, if the court really wanted to say, okay, we now realize it's gone to an extreme, it's leading to one-party domination, and we've got to do something about it, and they would figure out how to do it.
Yeah, you will draw these lines north and south, not according to political composition.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Because you look at Gene Green's issue. Mm-hmm. Gene Green's district was gerrymandered to be an Hispanic district.
This is in Houston,
It's right here in Houston. Gene Green's a friend of mine.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. U.S. representative.
Right.
If you look at his district, it's like somebody dropped an egg on the map and it splattered.
Wow.
Because it's not contiguous. Mm-hmm. It's a few precincts here and a few precincts here. surrounded by somebody else's district and a few precincts here, surrounded by somebody else's. Now you look at Sheila Jackson Lee's district, it's a contiguous, it's right, you can draw, it's got maps and boundaries and all that, but Gene Green's district is splattered. And Gene's able to hold on to it because he's good at like constituent services. Sheila's going to hold on it because people are afraid to run against Sheila. And so she's in the Democratic primary. As long as she's a Democrat, she will keep on getting reelected because it's gerrymandered to do that. But the reason it's gerrymandered to do that is to get all these Democrats that are in that boundary out of the neighboring Republican gerrymandered districts. So you concentrate the Democrats, and therefore you automatically concentrate the Republicans. Now, if the court said, no, you can't do it that way, you can't draw these lines so they concentrate. In other words, that's the politicians choosing their voters as opposed to the voters choosing their politician. It turns everything over on end. And there have been court decisions in some minor lower courts that said, no, this is not the way you do this. Unfortunately, as you go up the appellate route, it becomes a pattern that is more accessible.
Well, what could change a lot of this is if there's another super severe recession or something approaching a depression, where people suddenly feel their lives are severely threatened, their livelihood, the way they live and so forth, and question whether the system is working and whether it should be changed and so forth. And I think that could happen perhaps in the next 2 years. There's all sorts of experts who think that we may be facing something like that.
Yeah, but they were saying that no matter who got elected, we were going to have an economic downturn.
Well, Trump said that himself. He said there's a massive recession coming. He said that early in his campaign. So if that happens, the way the country is now, I think everything is up for grabs, so to speak. People are tremendously frustrated. And who knows what is going to happen in the future to America, in my opinion.
Well, we were the greatest experiment that there's ever been. There's been nothing like America before, and there may not be if it ever ends. You've had, even if you go back to England, even though it's not a true monarchy anymore, it was still a monarchy. Same thing with France. Anywhere else you want to go, there's never been anything like America.
Yeah. About 10 years ago, I read a report of a study made in Russia by, you might say, like the Brookings Institution in Russia, in which they analyzed America and they saw us breaking up. They saw the United States breaking up 10 years ago. And so one of the problems we face right now is the relationship of Trump to Putin. And Putin is an ex-KGB agent, an intelligence agent, and the question is whether he, with his access to Trump and what the Russians' long-term plan may be towards the United States, whether they don't have a plan to aggravate our situation.
Well, apparently they're doing a little aggravation right now.
Yeah,
I'm sure they do. I hope he continues on it, because the more he does, the more people are going to get pissed off.
Who does he mean?
The more Putin does, the more Trump does, the more he's going to piss everybody off. I forget which one of the founding fathers that said the tree of liberty must be
fed by the blood
of both tyrants and patriots. And for too long, we sat on our laurels saying, we're the best, it doesn't matter. No, it doesn't work like that. America is advanced citizenship. If you don't get involved, you lose what you got.
Well, do you recommend things like Australia, where it's mandatory to vote?
Actually, that wouldn't be a bad thing.
If you don't vote in Australia, you get fined $15. Now, $15...
Hey, you do that in North Korea, too, in case you didn't know.
Yeah, you can
I was reading an article today.
You can vote for everybody on the ballot.
I was reading an article today, and actually, it's a death sentence if you don't vote in North Korea.
But that's the ego thing. I got it.
But it's still there. But making everybody vote is not a bad thing, because people will actually wonder who's going to support their views to give them, their family, and their friends the best lot in life. So if you make everybody participate in the process, then democracy doesn't work without everybody's participation.
Well,
you get a few here, you get a few there. We get the Tea Party, we get the gerrymandering lines, and all these other things. If people got out and vote, politicians wouldn't be able to just play to the squeaky wheel. They would have to play to everybody, and they would be accountable to everybody the way the system was designed.
But that's a theory, and I don't think it's going to be enacted. I don't think we're ever going to reach the point in this country where everybody has to vote. I think what we're faced with.
I don't either, but at least.
Well,
what was it?
every once in a while.
Correct me if I'm just a second, right? Just correct me if I'm not wrong. I think it was not Sylvester's election, but Anisa's last election.
Yeah.
For mayor?
Somebody got elected by 1 or 2 votes.
Sure.
And they had 8% of the population, 8% of the registered voters turn out, and she won by like 1 or 2. That's unheard of.
Well, then something will come along, and a given politician with issues that they raise will inspire people to go to the polls. I think a lot of that happened in Donald Trump. A lot of people
either for or against.
Said, look here, we got something here. Let's all go voting for it, and they did in lockstep, and that worked. Bernie Sanders came over the hill, and in the Democratic primaries, Bernie inspired people that had not registered to vote and had not bothered to vote, didn't think that. But here comes Bernie, and Bernie's got a plan, and I believe him, and I'm going to go out there and vote for him. And so here all these kids came out of nowhere that had not voted before, and suddenly it wasn't the old Democratic Party establishment. There were all these burners in there, and they were very active. And notice, wherever there was elections by popular vote for the Democratic nomination, Hillary won, except Oregon. The one exception, a popular vote election, was Oregon. Everywhere else where Bernie won, it was done where the decision was made in caucuses. Well, you take a handful of kids, and you can run into a caucus, and you can dominate a caucus with 12, 14 people.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's how Bernie won all that support. It gave you the impression he carried like 22 states.
Wherever he spoke, tens of thousands of people would turn out. Where Hillary spoke, maybe a couple hundred would turn out.
Or if that.
If that.
Yeah.
So, there were people listening to his voice.
So are we in Cicero's Rome, where it's the entertainment and not the issues? In Cicero's Rome, it was, come watch them gladiators get killed in the arena. And I sponsored the gladiator show, therefore vote for me. If it has become about show business, then this American idea that you and I have don't have a chance.
We're headed there.
Are we
approaching
there?
We are approaching it, but we're not there yet. If we continue down the same path, that's where we're headed.
Where are we going, Doug?
Well, I approach it a little bit differently. I'm sitting in Putin's shoes, and I'm thinking about how Russia can influence the United States, and I think they have figured out how to influence what's going on in this country, and have been and were successful in this last election, and I don't think they'll discontinue doing that.
Is that the major issue?
I think it's something we have to. Nobody's thinking about very much, but I'm thinking about that. Putting it that way, I'm thinking about that.
You know, Doug, I studied the media so that I know how to use the media to manipulate. Mm-hmm. You just got through seeing a documentary where I manipulated the media to solve a homicide. Mm-hmm. And then I spent 15 years because I had wrongly manipulated.
Yeah.
trying to undo my mistake.
Yeah.
Media is extremely powerful. And what we had in this election was right up until the last minute, newsflash media, and it was timed almost to a precision that I have not seen before. Comey's announcement that he's going to investigate new emails came out at a crucial time during early voting. And then it came out, oh, well, there's nothing there. Never mind. Like a Saturday Night Live routine, but never mind.
And the WikiLeaks dripping these things out, which was a Russian operation, in my opinion. You know, I mean, there's ways of influencing the media. The media responded to WikiLeaks very, very vigorously. Anything that WikiLeaks put out, they
jumped on it. I mean, it was like putting carrots out in front of horses. I mean, they're going to eat them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And the media is not the media as you do it, or as a lot of people do it, because you have all the bloggers on the net.
Oh, yeah.
And the news outlets don't want to get scooped by the bloggers, so they don't take time to actually back check the story. They don't take the time to see if the truth or fact or fiction, because by the time they do that, the bloggers have spread it and it is run rampant across the internet with nobody even bothered to see
And somebody's
if it's
making
truth
money
or
off
not.
of that.
It sounds good. Well,
They're
you're
saying
the
what I
one
want to
that-
hear.
If I'm not mistaken, you're the one that told me about the news media. They're there to sell advertising space.
That's what all television and radio is about.
That's it. So whatever will scare people, will shock people, will make people tune in is exactly what they're going to say.
Well, any closing comment?
Well, we seem to cover a lot of subjects.
Been
here.
all over the territory here. Richard, you got anything to say? Because I got to talk to these people about the station. My name is Ray Hill, and I am the sometimes host of Public Affairs, Public Access, and I'm glad to be here tonight. I'm really excited about having two probative guests, Doug Caddy, who's been on before, and Richard, this is his debut on this show. I suspect he'll be back. We look into things here that you might not think about, but if you think about them and you've got some comments to say, you can send me direct messages, email at hillray@sbcglobal.net. It's a simple, ordinary Southern Belle address. Or you can contact the station here at hms.org. Leave your comments. It'll get back to us one way or the other. We'll be back for some more shows in the future. But Richard just got through saying that all radio and television is about selling stuff, and that's true except this one. The only thing we have to sell here, and nobody gets paid for it, is your ideas. You can come to hmstv.org on your internet, and you can actually come to our studios at the corner of Roberts and Harrisburg, and you can learn to use our equipment to produce television shows with your own ideas. There's no place else in this city you can go to do that. Here you're welcome. If you're not ready to get into lights and color and movement, then we got a radio studio here, and you can get into it via the radio, and you can hear the radio that we do at hmsnetradio.org. As a matter of fact, every Wednesday, I'm in these studios producing a radio show live, and you can call in that. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you much for supporting Houston Media Source. And we've had a good time, and we hope that you've had a good time, and we'll be back. These programs are intermittent. They don't come on at a regular schedule. They take a lot of work by the staff, and Mark Pirtle's in there doing all the producing, and Richard and Doug and I are in here having a lot of fun with his hard work. Be the media you wished you could see and hear. That's Houston Media Source. On the web, hmstv.org. Thank you. Good evening.